Well, good morning, everybody. As I'm going to call the meeting to order. Clerk, will you call the roll?
Bajent.
Here.
Clegg.
Here.
Halliburton.
Here.
Sanchez. Thompson.
Here.
Woodings.
Here.
5 present, 1 absent.
Well, welcome, everyone. It's great to see so many of you in the chambers today. And Rebecca, I'm sure there are others beyond you, but we can see you in like full screen this morning. We are here for our annual budget workshop, and it was about a month ago that we met and went through some of this, and we'll go through more detail today. As we kick off, I want to give a special thanks to the budget team, of course, Eric, and then Travis, but also Mike and Joe and Angie Hahn, all of whom were a big part of this, and we named in the book, but I just wanted to acknowledge you directly today. This and staff in general, I see many of the department directors here, other team members. This year has been a really tough year. You've been through a lot. You've juggled so much. And now as we move out of it, you see reflected in the budget that you've put together, our understanding of what the community needs, but also optimism for the days ahead. So really look forward to the conversation today going through it. I'm working with council to finalize the next steps. And with that, Eric, I'll hand it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor, members of the council. I am going to start off, and it doesn't look like you can see my slides quite yet, but I'm going to just start off with a picture of the book. We released our budget document on Friday of last week. We released that budget document online as well. So for any members of the public who are interested in following along.
Yes.
I'm going to make a request of
Yeah.
all staff today that you speak into the microphone and make it easier for us instead of having to listen really hard. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Sure. We'll see if that's any better.
Maybe, I don't know if it's Matt or who's back there behind the curtain. Could that mic be,
That could be that's turned down. Yeah.
could the volume be upped? Okay.
I'll just speak
All right.
up a little bit. Thank you very much. So we released the budget document on the city's website on Friday. On the website, we also provided opportunities for the public to provide feedback and or ask any questions. We also provided a link on the website for people to access our open book platform, which is an interactive platform allowing residents in the community to see historical revenue and expenditure information. The workshop this morning, I will go through an overview of the fiscal year 22 budget for the first hour and 15 minutes or so, then get into our fees. After that, we have a number of other topics and staff here to present to you. We'll have a discussion around capital projects and cost increases that are currently being experienced. We'll have an update on our American Rescue Plan. And then we have a number of folks here to talk about the various strategic initiatives that are underway in the areas of housing, climate, transportation, and economic development. Before I dig in, I just kind of want to talk a little bit about the objectives of this presentation. The budget that was released last week and the conversation that we're having today really is a culmination of many months of work by staff throughout the entire organization and extended dialogue with city leadership. The goal of the meeting today is to build upon the conversations that we've had thus far on the budget and provide additional details, both for the city council as well as the public. I think it's worth noting that nothing will be formally approved as a part of this presentation today. Approvals will come later on throughout the course of the summer. This is really an opportunity to dig in, ask questions, and learn details about what's included in the fiscal year 22 proposed budget. And, as you can see, we have staff here available to answer any operational questions you might have throughout the course of the day. So I'm going to start off with some themes around the fiscal year 22 budget. As always, we aim to be fiscally prudent as we're making recommendations We aim not only to be balanced in the upcoming fiscal year, but also throughout the forecast period. We aim to remain balanced while also allowing for investment in services throughout the community. Throughout the budget, there are savings that have been built in, as well as revenue enhancement opportunities. The budget does include targeted investments, enabling the city to respond to growth, specifically in the areas of public safety and support departments, although there are numerous investments in other areas as well, which will be discussed. The proposed revenue estimates for fiscal year 22 do represent recovery from the levels that were built into the current year budget. Some of those categories include sales tax, development fees, and departmental revenue. And again, details on each of those categories will be provided throughout the course of the morning. One of the goals that we have is to ensure that we're proactively allocating resources at the beginning of the year, as opposed to having unallocated resources at the beginning of the year, at the end of the year, I should say. The budget also does include investments in various strategic initiatives, housing, climate innovation. I'll speak to some of those, and then you'll hear specifically from subject matter experts in each of those areas after I'm done. So I'll go through some high-level highlights that are included in this proposed budget. The budget does include compensation increases for general employees after no base increases in the current fiscal year. As part of our fiscal year 21 budget, a COVID budget, there were no compensation increases for general employees. The budget also includes funding for market rate adjustments. The budget does account for the impacts that we'll be seeing from statewide legislation, both in property tax and sales tax. The budget includes utilization of funds that were previously held for the main library, ensuring that they're allocated to more immediate uses, namely affordable housing and library maintenance. The budget maintains flexibility for using American Rescue Plan resources, and you'll hear more about that a little bit later this morning. And the budget continues funding VRT, our public transportation system, at a level equivalent to 5% of our property taxes. A few more highlights. The budget includes the establishment of the Office of Police Accountability. It's detailed within the budget document. One of the things we've done differently this year is proactively planned one-time surplus funding in fiscal year 21. So sometimes at the conclusion of the fiscal year, we'll have expenditure savings or excess revenue, and we will make recommendations on how to allocate that after the year is concluded. This year, we built our revenue estimates at a time when we didn't know what the economy was going to look like. We built our revenue estimates in May of last year, and many of our revenue categories have outpaced what we projected. If you think about sales tax, development fees, numerous others, they have performed better than anticipated. So this budget assumes that we will end the year higher, and we will proactively allocate those resources into fiscal year 22. One of the strategies, the principal strategies for using those one-time unallocated funds from the current fiscal year is for paying debt. And that debt strategy enables additional base investments in future years through the retirement of some of our debt early. The budget continues to retain our cash flow reserve at a level equivalent to 8% of our general fund budget. It includes additional resources for both major equipment projects and major repairs and maintenance projects. It includes a $2.5 million allocation for one-time projects to be led by departments that are still in the process of being identified. As those projects are identified, they'll be brought forward for City Council consideration through the interim budget change process. And finally, in terms of highlights, the budget does include contingency funding to address any unanticipated needs that may come up.
Madam Mayor. Thank you. Eric, I may as well ask this question now. The 2.5 million for the portfolio fund, which I think is a great idea. Just a little unclear. Is it just reallocating money that otherwise was going to be spent on these projects, or is that money that has come because of growth in budget?
I'd say it's a little bit of both. Typically throughout the year, we oftentimes bring forward projects. If you think back over the last several years, one-time type projects at different times. As Wendy Ellistad and others have worked to really work on our work plan and make sure that it's very well thought out. We want to make sure that any projects we bring go through a rigorous process, gating process, and some due diligence in advance before we bring those recommendations forward. So to some degree, it's holding funds that we otherwise would bring throughout the course of the year. And to another degree, it's utilizing some of those revenue improvement numbers.
So just to follow up, just so I'm clear on it, would we previously, this money would have come out of various department budgets or out of contingency or out of the capital plan fund, or all three, and now it's just consolidating them into one fund?
It's again many of those situations, but I think primarily the funding would be allocated at the end of the year. So if you think back to December of 2020, there were numerous projects that we brought recommendations for City Council consideration, utilizing one-time surplus funding. It's some of that as well.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, just to kind of follow on that a little bit, Eric, it looked to me like the contingency funds were smaller than they were in prior years. Is that correct? Like just kind of I know our strategic contingency is because of the investment we're making in police and fire staffing studies. But it seemed like the more general mayor's office contingency funds were also smaller. Is that correct?
I think that the principal change around our contingencies from last year to this year is as part of the fiscal year 21 budget, we had allocated a COVID contingency. That COVID contingency is no longer in place for a couple of reasons. One being the improvement that we're seeing in some of our revenue categories, and secondarily, the backstop of the American Rescue Plan.
Great.
So,
thank you for that clarification.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
I had a question about the project portfolio fund as well. And I think it's very similar to the council president's, because just tell me if this is wrong, that nothing has really changed except for the process for bringing a project forward and requesting those funds, because there's now a flow chart depending on whether resources are needed. There's anticipating up to $100,000 of planning funding that can get spent. And then the ultimate source of a large expenditure is still the same kind of places we always source those expenditures from, except that under this budget, we've just more clearly delineated that this is roughly the amount of money that we anticipate potentially having to draw on for projects this year. And this is a process, like a sort of internal procedure that's spelled out in our budget, and I assume internally in our policies somewhere for how to access it. So big picture, it hasn't really changed, but little picture, the timing and the procedures for staff to access that and for our financial planning at the end of the year has changed. Is that right?
yes, that was very well put. Better than I had stated previously. Yeah, we have been bringing forward projects for City Council consideration over the past many years that that often came at the end of the year or throughout the course of the year, and we're trying to be more strategic in how we bring those projects forward going forward.
Okay, thank you very much.
So I'm going to do now an overview of our citywide budget. For anybody following along, you might look at pages 31 and 32 of the budget document. The fiscal year 22 budget includes planned expenses of just under 662 million. I have an asterisk on that line there because that number is not inclusive of the contingent appropriation. The contingent appropriation is included as part of this budget, however, and we've built in a separate page in the budget document, page 85, that describes that in more detail. We've broken that apart a little bit because the 275 million contingent appropriation doesn't represent planned expenses that we're aware of at this point in time. It's that contingent appropriation is really a mechanism for us to carry over projects from one year to the next. So in the current year, we have capital projects that have a multi-year nature to them that are going to carry forward by nature. This contingent appropriation gives us budget authority to carry those funds over from one year to the next. It also will allow us to appropriate funds from the American Rescue Plan that aren't currently allocated because we're still working through that process and there's more dialogue to be had there. So we've tried to separate out the known and planned expenses from grants or carryover funds that we may experience going forward.
Madam Mayor. So on that, Eric, the net contingent appropriation is bigger this year. Is that because of the American Rescue Plan in part?
It is. Thank you for that question. Yeah, in the fiscal year 21 budget, we had set the contingent appropriation at 175 million.
Yeah.
We set it to 275 million in fiscal year 22 due to a couple of things. One is the American Rescue Plan. A second is project delays that we've experienced throughout the city. So we could anticipate a higher level of rebudgets. And third is we may see another federal stimulus, an infrastructure plan, jobs plan that may bring additional resources to the city. So rather than have delays at that point in time, we would have the authority to bring forward recommendations for council allocation of those resources.
Thank you. I think it's important to note for any of the press that are listening or the public that the total budget amount that you'll hear is considerably larger because of that contingency, but the actual budget is this 661.8. And we often hear the total number quoted as look at the increase in budget, but in fact, it's just a contingency to be able to utilize, especially federal grant funding that otherwise we wouldn't be able to utilize.
Thank you for that clarification. As we look at that $662 million, it's allocated across 4 categories when you're looking at it from a fund perspective. So we have our general fund, and that's where I'll probably spend the majority of our time this morning. Our general fund budget for fiscal year 22 is 276 million. The general fund is where we account for our operating costs associated with general government services. So you can think public safety, library, parks, and that is primarily supported through taxes. We have our capital funds. So the general fund transfers money each year to a dedicated fund for capital improvements. We have our development impact fee fund, and we have our clean water and open space levy fund. Those 3 funds in total are budgeted at just around $33 million. Those are infrastructure projects, again, associated with general government functions, also primarily supported through taxes. Oops, wrong direction. We have our enterprise funds that represent about 44% of that 662 million. And when you think enterprise funds, you can think our airport fund, our solid waste fund, water renewal, and geothermal. Those are primarily funded through use of those services. And that 294 million includes both operating and capital related costs. Finally, we have a number of other funds that make up about 9% at about $58 million of the 662 million. Those funds include our debt service fund, risk, workers' comp, our various housing related funds, and our fleet fund. If we break down the fiscal year 22 proposed budget by category, it can really be broken down into three main groupings: capital equipment, personnel, and maintenance and operations. So maintenance and operations is really what we call our non-personnel type expenses and non-capital expenses. So you can think about examples such as supplies, insurance, utilities, contracts that we have for various services. We also include transfers and contingency funds in that category. We have about 277 million allocated across all funds in fiscal year 22 for that. Capital and equipment at just under $170 million, or approximately 25% of the budget. And this grouping includes capital investments across all of our funding sources. So you can think about the ones on the previous slide that showed the capital funds for general government functions, so fire, police, parks. You can also think about capital investments that we have in our enterprise funds, water renewal facility improvements, airport rental car garage, and numerous other capital projects. Finally, about a third of the budget is allocated towards personnel expenses. That's, as it sounds, salary and benefit costs associated with permanent and temporary city employees.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
Eric, does that also include our contracts for public safety, our contract employees?
Thank you for that question. It does.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
Eric, also on the personnel, does that include all the different buckets? So police and fire, those personnel?
Councilmember Thompson, yes, it does. So it includes all the various departments, and it includes all the components that make up personnel, so salaries, benefits, and everything else. I'm going to now move on to a summary of our general fund revenues. And for those following along, we have a revenue manual in our budget document, pages 19 through 30, where you can reference a lot of this information. So first, a high-level view of our general fund revenues. You can see on the pie chart on the left that property tax is overwhelmingly our largest revenue source within the general fund. It makes up about 61% of total general fund revenues. You can see other large slices of the pie include departmental revenue, sales tax, development fees, and carry forward, which is the first time in the last several years that we've proactively planned carry forward resources as part of our budget. The table to the right shows historical and planned revenue within some of our major categories. And what you can see there is, and I'll hit on each one. Sales tax, you can see that in fiscal year 19 and 20, it was around the $21 million range. When we built the fiscal year 21 budget, we were anticipating some pretty steep declines, and we built in revenue at 17.5 million. That category has performed better than we had anticipated when we built the budget. So as part of this budget, we're building back up our estimate in sales tax to better align with actual collection levels.
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
Thank you. Eric, of course, our sales tax is limited now by the 1% cap that we're under with the new distribution formula. I'd just like to bring that up because I think it's an area, Madam Mayor, that's ripe for conversation over the coming year. If we're not going to be hopefully working on other property tax legislation, maybe we could work with the other cities around the state to find a formula that maybe better fits what's happening around the state in terms of growth.
Thank you. Yes, and that is a good point about the 1%, and I'll elaborate on that throughout the course of the slides here. But the increase from the 17.5 million to 21.4 million is reflective of the new base that was set. And from that point forward, we can only increase by 1% in future years until we hit certain milestones. Development fees is similar to sales tax in that it was set fairly conservatively as part of the 21 budget. The 22 estimate brings it back more in line with what we're seeing currently in the economy. Franchise fees is a relatively stable source and was, by and large, minimally impacted due to COVID. Liquor tax is another category that has some impacts associated with statewide legislation. I think fiscal year 23 might be our final year of seeing reduced rates of growth in liquor tax. In that particular instance, the reduced rate of growth that we're seeing is offset by expenditure savings in the form of contributions that the city makes towards magistrate court services. But we would expect once we get past fiscal year 23 to see growth more in line with what we're seeing at the statewide level. Department revenue, we've built in some increases there. Some of the increases there are associated with facilities being open and higher participation levels anticipated. And fines and forfeitures largely similar to historical growth. I'll move to property tax. I have a number of slides around property tax. So our fiscal year 22 budgeted estimate for property tax is $169.4 million. That figure assumes 3% growth from the current fiscal year, base growth of 3%, and our allowable new construction. So in total, a 4.5% year-over-year increase. That 4.5% increase is well below the cap that was established as part of the 2021 legislative session up at the State House. The $169.4 million does not include any use of available foregone property taxes. And if we think back to last year, when the City Council approved a 0% increase for property taxes, that resulted in about $4.8 million of foregone property tax that could be available for future budgets. This budget does not include any of that.
Madam Mayor, thank you. Eric, can you please remind folks what the actual savings were when we did that for individuals?
Sure. And I might need somebody to help me a little bit because there was a couple of components to that. And it really kind of draws out the conversation that we've been having around property taxes. When the city decided to take a 0% increase in recognition of the struggles that folks were having around COVID, we did an analysis and we tried to determine what folks would see on their property tax bill. And even with a 0% increase, we would have expected to see a 5.9% increase on people's property tax bills. Subsequent to that, there was a property tax relief program that was made available, and the city was able to participate by virtue of that 0% increase. And through that property tax relief program from the state utilizing federal resources, there was about a 17% savings on property tax bills on a one-time basis. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. The revenue estimates for property tax assume the impacts from the 2021 legislation over a 5-year period. That will result in approximately $7.5 million less in revenue to be received associated with growth than would otherwise be collected. What that means, sorry,
Go ahead.
okay. What that means is when the city calculates how much revenue can be received on a property tax roll associated with new construction, we can only collect 90% of the value as opposed to 100% of the value. That dynamic over time will certainly stretch resources and make it difficult for the city to provide services associated with growth.
Madam Mayor. Eric, I think it's important again for the members of the public who are in the audience to understand that at least from my reading interpretation of this new law, it really forces our hand on the 3% because we can't collect the entire value of new construction in our community and allow that new construction to help pay for the growth that they're creating. And instead, in order to provide the services at the level that people are expecting, we're almost forced into taking the full 3%. I don't know that that was the intent of the legislation, but at least as I interpret it, that's how it's going to be impact cities going forward.
Thank you for that. Oops, wrong direction. A little bit more on property tax. This chart is included in our budget document, and you can see the history of the levy rate. And the levy rate is such that it declines when property values are going up. So we have seen year-over-year increases since the Great Recession on assessed property values, which has created downward pressure on the levy rate. You can see in fiscal year 22, there is a very slight increase from the 21 rate. That increase is not to say that property values are going down. Rather, it's a reflection of the one-time relief that was available in fiscal year 21 rolling off, which is having a kind of an inverse effect and increasing the levy rate slightly. This slide here is one that we've shown to council in the past. It shows the tax burden for property taxes by property category. And the source for this was the Ada County Assessor's dashboard. If you go back to 2002, you can see that commercial and residential properties both paid approximately 50% of the property tax burden. Over time, those percentages have grown further and further apart, especially over the last 7 or 8 years. And there's numerous factors for that. One is the rate of assessed increase for residential properties versus commercial properties. The other is the diminishing value of the homeowner's exemption. You can see that for 2021, the disparity is wider than it ever has been, at approximately 71% for residential properties and 29% for commercial properties. I'm going to now talk a little bit about the average home within the city of Boise. And if you go back to 2016, the average home per the assessor's office was $214,000. Fast forward to the most recent assessment, the average home in the city of Boise is almost $440,306. That's a 106% increase over about 6 years. The next column that says assessed growth on the average home, you can see year over year how much that average home has increased. 5% as a low, all the way up to 25.5% as part of this most recent assessment period. The middle column here shows the homeowner's exemption, and you can see that the homeowner's exemption has moved very little. in comparison with the average growth or the assessed growth on the average home. You can see in the second to last column there that the tax growth on the average home has increased quite a bit. And this is for city taxes only, 5%, 8%, or 9%, all the way up to our anticipated growth of about 29.9% for fiscal year 22. I want to dwell on 21 for a moment and maybe elaborate a little bit more on my answer to Councilmember Sanchez. In fiscal year 21, it would have been a 5.9% increase. It was 14.5% decrease solely because of the one-time relief that was available through federal resources through the state. On the far right column, you can see what base growth has been for city property tax collections. And you can see 3% with last year being a 0%. I think one of the main takeaways of this slide is that while the city has received 3% or less over the last several years in terms of growth, overall, the individual homeowner has seen very different, very different rate of collection or rate of payment, I should say. And there's a lot of dynamics that go into individual property tax bills. The main driver of that, of the increases that folks are seeing, being the diminishing value of the homeowner's exemption, as well as the rate of growth compared to commercial properties. This is another way to kind of look at that average home. You can see that in 2016 on the blue line, about 58% of that average priced home was subject to property tax. Fast forward to fiscal year 22, you can see that 72% of that average priced home is subject to property tax. And you can see the orange line below the rate of growth for the homeowner's exemption, which has been really flat for the last several years. There was an increase that folks will see as part of this upcoming assessment period. It increased from 100,000 to 125,000, but you can also see the rate of growth for the average priced home value, that far right segment of the blue line, accelerating or growing at a higher rate than the homeowner's exemption. So I think the takeaway here is that the homeowner's exemption increases have not kept up with the rate of increases that folks are seeing on their assessed property.
Madam Mayor. Eric, isn't it also true that in addition to slightly increasing the homeowner's exemption, the legislature increased the personal property exemption for businesses by 150,000. So homeowners got 25,000 in exemption relief, and businesses with personal property got 150,000. Is that correct?
That is correct. They did increase the personal property exemption. With that particular exemption, the state is making up making that up. So it's not deflecting, it's not exacerbating the burden shift that we're already seeing, but there was a higher exemption granted for commercial properties than for residential.
Thank you.
This analysis, I know you've seen before, but for any members of the public that might be watching, it's a rather interesting view. What it does is it looks at the average home within the city of Boise and shows the impacts of the city taking or not taking a 3% increase. So I'll kind of walk it through from top to bottom. You can see on line 2, it shows the assessed value for the average price home. And in fiscal year 21, it was $351,000. Fiscal year 22, $440,000. That's a 25.5% increase. Line 3 shows the exemption, the homeowner's exemption. It did increase from 100,000 to 125,000. And you can see on line 4 the taxable value for that home increasing from 251,000 to 315,000, a 25% increase. The city levy rate shows a slight increase for fiscal year 22 of 3.4%. You can see on line 6, the city taxes for that particular home are projected to go up by 29.9%, a $335 increase. That scenario, lines 1 through 7, are reflective of the city taking a 3% increase to support city services. When you look at the bottom portion, it shows the same analysis, but if the city were to have taken a 0%. And you can see lines 9, 10, and 11 mirroring lines 2, 3, and 4 up above. Line 12, you can see the city levy rate would go up just ever so slightly, so a little bit less, with a 0% increase. And you can see on line 14 the taxes that the average homeowner would pay if the city were to have taken a 0% increase. If you compare the top section to the bottom section, $335 versus $292, you can see that the cost on line 15, the cost of the city taking a 3% increase is approximately $42. So the increase that folks, that the average homeowner would expect to see on their property tax bill is largely associated with other factors, apart and aside from the 3% increase. And those factors are, the expiration of that one-time relief that was available in the prior year, the diminishing value of the homeowner's exemption, as I've shown and talked about before, and then the rate of growth for residential property versus commercial property. We are consistently seeing residential property assessing at a higher clip than commercial property. This year, I think it was about 24% for residential properties versus 17% for commercial. So there's quite a wide disparity there that is driving that increase.
Madam Mayor. This is, of course, my favorite slide in the entire history of property tax conversations in Idaho, so I like to dwell on it. It does a really great job of showing that 3% amounts to about $42 for the average homeowner, which that's not the amount of money that people are complaining about with their property taxes. Eric and I had a conversation a couple of weeks ago. People care about not seeing their property taxes increase. So what could we do at the city of Boise to keep your property taxes flat this year? And the answer is, to keep your property taxes flat this year, we could cut the entire Parks and Rec operating budget. That would do it. We could cut the entire operating budget for the library, public works, planning and development, and arts and history. That would do it. But that would only do it this year. In order to make it happen next year, we'd have to take a corresponding cut and a corresponding cut and a corresponding cut. So there is no way to deliver the city services that people expect while keeping property taxes flat. And this shows that, we're not getting more money. What's happening is homeowners are picking up more and more of the tab because of this burden shift, because of the one-time roll-off that Eric talked about a moment ago, all of these things. So the 3% conversation that we often have really is a sideshow. In order to keep the property taxes flat, we would have to literally gut every public-facing city service over the next 5 years. This slide shows that in a numbers way, but in a actual what does it mean way, that's what we would be talking about. And so for people who wonder why we're taking the 3% or why their taxes are going up a lot more than 3%, this is why. And this is the alternative that the city has otherwise, is really to delete the city of Boise as the public experiences it.
Madam Mayor, just to reemphasize Councilman Bajet, so basically you saved a tank of gas for all of that.
Yep.
Thanks.
Sorry, I keep going the wrong way. I'll pivot from property tax. I'd be happy to take any other property tax questions at the end of the revenue overview. Very briefly on sales tax, as Council President Clegg talked about, we are limited at 1% growth. You can see the darker blue lines on the left-hand side of this slide. We were seeing some pretty reasonable growth in our sales tax. We built the fiscal year 21 budget considerably lower based on anticipated impacts from COVID. The 22 proposed budget, the orange bar here, restores our revenue estimate for sales tax to be in line with the new base that was set from legislation approved last year. And you can see the gray bars are largely flat, 1% growth in sales tax, which will be limited to, or at least that's what we've projected ourselves to be limited to based on that legislation. Development fees has been a category that we've seen increases in. Historically, it did go down somewhat due to COVID, but not to the degree that we had anticipated. The fiscal year 22 budget includes a restoration of levels for development fees that we've experienced in the past. I think it's important to note when we talk about development fees that there is a corresponding expenditure associated with the revenues that we collect. So folks that go out and inspect buildings, that review plans, all of the work associated with development, those fees are intended to recover. This increase recovers a greater percentage. We're still not recovering 100% of our development related expenses.
Eric, going out, you're projecting that development fees will follow a little bit and then finally catch back up to where we are today. Given the housing shortage and other things that we're seeing, I'm guessing you did this to be conservative and that it's possible that that won't be the case.
Yeah, so we'll certainly revisit our 23 through 26 assumptions when we develop next year's budget. There were, multiple considerations that we went through. One being potential labor shortages, that might inhibit growth. As you look at inflation and impacts on the cost of goods, that could also inhibit growth. So I think your statement is correct. We were a little conservative in our outer year projections. When we get into fiscal year, when we start developing the 23 budget, we'll assess what the economic environment is at that time.
I bring that up because, development fees are probably our most volatile of those kinds of fees. And it seems like for projecting purposes, it is going to be conservative. At the same time, we should maybe try to find a mean of where that up and down has been as we project, because I think we've under projected in the past, and it's left us then unable to react to the development pressure that we're getting.
Yes, certainly. Thank you for
Thanks.
that.
Madam Mayor, Eric, I'm curious on our development fees, because this is such a big way of how growth pays for growth. But I'm wondering how our development fees compared to the development fees in other Treasure Valley cities. Is there any uniformity? Are they kind of all over the place? Has that been studied? I know that we have an advisory committee for this, so I'm hoping you have some insight there.
I may not be the best person to speak to that. We could come back with additional information, or should we come back, or I might tag in Jason. Yeah.
Thanks for answering this on the fly, Jason. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mayor and council members. Yeah, our fees are constantly looked at, and we do evaluate other jurisdictions too, but I know we've been kind of holding off. I think we did some fee adjustments the last couple of years, but I think we're going to do a fee study here. Is it next year? Next year, I believe, and do another analysis. So, and that's department-wide planning wise too, with building and planning. So there is a plan to look at our fees again.
That's great, because I think as the Treasure Valley grows, we want to encourage as much of that growth to be infill and building density in our urban core. And I feel like if our development fees get outsized from other jurisdictions, maybe that could have the impact of dampening that a little bit. So we don't want that to happen, but at the same time, you know, we want the development fees to pay for the development. So I appreciate that balance that you're probably constantly trying to strike.
Yes, and it does go back and forth between jurisdictions. And so we have to always evaluate and look at it. And so
Yeah.
it's a constant for sure.
I'm sure. Thank you.
Mhm.
I appreciate that.
Thank you. I'll finish up our revenue discussion by just a quick view of our departmental revenues. These are revenues that are, you know, separate and distinct from any of our tax revenues, sales, liquor, property tax. And these are primarily revenues that are generated through departmental activity. You can see the left-hand portion of this pie chart are public safety service contracts. So fire providing services on behalf of the NACFR and Whitney Fire Protection Districts on behalf of the airport, and the police department providing services for BSU, the airport, and the school district. Those public safety contracts make up about 55% of department revenues. On the right-hand side, you can see varying other categories: golf, ice world, the zoo, business licenses, criminal prosecution. We provide prosecutorial services on behalf of the city of Meridian, and some of the smaller slices of pie up top: aquatics, library, so on and so forth. Those were kind of my comments on revenue. I can again take questions as we go or at the end. I'll move to our general fund expenses. So if you look at it at a category level, you can see that just about 2/3 of general fund expenses are dedicated towards people. So that's salaries, benefits, everything that goes into personnel compensation associated with the delivery of services for our community. You can see the next largest slice of that pie being M&O, or maintenance and operations. You can see our transfer to the debt service fund at 6.6% and our capital transfer also at 6.6%. Our contribution to VRT at 3.1%, and that's 3.1% of the total, but it still is 5% of our property tax budget. If you look at our expenditures at a departmental level, you can see public safety making up about 51% of overall general fund expenses, parks and recreation at about 14%, our support services, HR, finance, IT, and legal at about 13%, library and planning being the next largest individual slices of that pie. As we look at staffing growth trends, you can see on this slide that between fiscal year 17 and 20, the city added an average of 28 positions per year. As part of the 21 budget, the city added 9. So the rate of position growth has not necessarily kept up with the population growth in the Boise MSA. If you look at the MSA, it's increased by 14% since 2017, city staffing again at 9%. So the recommended position adjustments included as part of this budget to some degree are a catch-up. And if you take a 2-year view, are in line with levels that have been added in historical years.
Madam Mayor. Yeah. I have a question about that previous slide, Eric. When we do interim budget changes throughout the year, we added quite a few positions via that process last year. Would those newly created IBC positions show up in this chart in fiscal year 20 or in 21? In other words, when we compare to the fiscal year 20 personnel, is it 20 as amended, or is it the total number as amended as an adjusted throughout the year up until now?
Good question. So 20 and back are amended. So any interim budget changes that have been approved adding positions. The 21 number was the adopted number. So the most recent IBCs that have been brought forward were effectively accelerating positions that otherwise would have been included as part of this budget process. So these numbers hold with that analysis.
So those accelerated positions would show up in this chart under the fiscal year 20 bar because they were an interim budget change to the 20 budget?
No, we added those positions during fiscal year 21. So they would be they would be augmentations to our staffing that occurred after the adoption of the 21 budget. I didn't reflect them in this 9 positions added in 21. That was what we added as part of the adopted budget. We added positions midstream during 21, but those positions that we added were effectively accelerated position adds that we otherwise would have added in 22. So when we did this analysis, we looked at those accelerated positions as well as the positions that are included as part of the budget document. And we are still within our average bounds.
Got it. Thank you.
Overall staffing, you can see in the general fund between what was added during fiscal year 21 and what's proposed, an augmentation of 44 positions. In our other funds, an augmentation of just under 13 positions. In 21, that 6.86 plus the 0.4 represent current year IBCs, as you were just mentioning, Councilmember Bajent, as well as FTE reallocations. There have been some reductions that have offset some of the increases that you've seen in the most recent IBCs. And the position changes proposed as part of the 22 budget are really across the city. There are a number of positions for our police department. We have included positions for our various support departments. Criminal prosecution due to the addition of an additional court, some library augmentations, parks maintenance, community engagement, and the establishment of the Office of Police Accountability. And there are numerous positions proposed for our water renewal fund and airport and solid waste fund as well, totaling about 12.5 positions. On this slide, you can see the condition of projected condition of our cash flow reserve. The City Council had been targeting an allocation of 8% of general fund revenues in our cash flow reserve. It took a number of years to get there. We reached that level approximately 2019, and we project that we'll stay at that level even with this growth through additional contributions into the cash flow reserve. I'll do a quick overview of our capital fund. The capital fund includes a recommendation to repurpose $25 million that was previously set aside for the main library. The primary utilization of those resources are major repairs and maintenance associated with the library, as well as various housing affordability initiatives, incentives and partnerships, permanent supportive housing, and also the value of land, an additional $10 million associated with that. This budget includes acceleration of relocation of city services for parks maintenance that are housed at Julia Davis Park, as well as fire logistics, because those lands, those properties would be ideal locations for potential housing developments. As we look at our general fund transfers into the capital fund, we have recommended a restoration of the annual transfer into the capital fund. So one of the impacts of COVID last year, reduced revenue estimates, 0% increase was we reduced our transfer into the capital fund. So we've brought that back up to the historical level of approximately $13 million. There are some supplemental transfers included as part of fiscal year 22 for major repairs and maintenance and major equipment. And there are a number of various capital projects included as part of the 22 plan. If you look at our major equipment, $10.1 million recommended in fiscal year 22. The majority of that is for police at approximately $5.8 million. That $5.8 million is allocated for a couple of purposes. One, for annual replacement of our fleet, as we need to buy, new police vehicles and add to our fleet for the new police officers that we're adding as part of this budget. We also have various equipment needs for the police department built into this budget. Radios, mobile terminals, tasers, and a number of other things. Within our other categories, parks, IT, fire, those are largely vehicle replacement. You can see that we've established a higher electrification fund for our fleet of $325,000. As part of our normal replacement cycle, we always look to see if there are opportunities to replace with electric vehicles. That $325,000 is in addition to that. So if there are certain instances where there might be a slight premium for an electric vehicle, we've established funding for that. You can see on the right-hand side, our year-over-year allocation for major equipment has gone up quite a bit from fiscal year 21 to 22. The primary driver for that is some of the non-fleet equipment that we've built in as part of this budget.
Madam Mayor.
Yeah.
Couple of things quickly. Back to the slide before, just wanted to mention the housing affordability out of the repurposed library funds. And while it says over 5 years, that money is set aside. And if we were able to get a project going sooner, it could happen sooner. Is that correct?
That is correct. Thank
I
you for
just
that.
wanted the public to be able to understand that.
Yes, thank you for that clarification.
Thank you. And then on the next slide, on the major equipment, as a result of the American Rescue Plan and the CARES Act, we've recognized opportunities and grants that I think we haven't taken advantage of as a city for a while. And so I'm looking forward. I support the major equipment that we are purchasing this year, propose to purchase, but looking forward to those positions that are being added to manage the grant funds. Also looking for opportunities, especially I think in this area on major equipment for some federal grants that could help us out on some of these.
Most certainly. Yes, thank you. As we look at major repairs and maintenance, you can see that the majority of our planned allocation is for parks and recreation, about $3.4 million. We have a recommendation for public works and library as well. Examples of projects that we might spend major repairs and maintenance funding on might be playground replacements, sports fields, office space enhancements to accommodate growth and telework, roof and facility related structural repairs, as well as the aforementioned main library. You can see on the right-hand side of this slide, our projected funding for major repairs and maintenance is increasing as we look at our assets and ensure that we are adequately maintaining and replacing outdated equipment. If you look at our individual capital projects, we have $10.6 million allocated in fiscal year 22. We could certainly accelerate projects if opportunity comes forward. But some of the highlights in fiscal year 22 include our ADA transition plan. There was a multi-year study of our facilities and assets see how they conform with ADA. Staff is in the process of developing a transition plan with the community and consultants. And once that transition plan is developed, we have resources in place to start making improvements. We have funding allocated for fire services, Station 5 and our Northwest Station, primarily planning and design work for those two stations. We have a number of parks, which will see improvements in fiscal year 22. Franklin, Pine Grove, Stewart Gulch. You can see them on the slide there. There's a few others. And then our support facilities acceleration, moving moving support services off of city-owned property to eventually facilitate housing development or affordable housing for both parks maintenance and fire logistics. That was the budget overview. I'd be happy to stand for any questions on any of that content before I move into the fees.
Madam Mayor?
Yeah.
Thank you. So Eric, that includes the increased cost in construction that everyone's experiencing, increased cost in materials?
That's a very good question, Councilmember Sanchez. When we built the budget, we attempted to build in estimates associated with the increased costs that we're seeing. It's very likely that additional increases will be required. Sean Wilson's going to talk a little bit more about the current climate that we're seeing and some of the measures we may need to take in response to that. But we are seeing very rapid escalation with labor and with materials, and that will certainly translate into our cost of capital projects.
Thanks, Eric.
Madam Mayor. Eric, so I just want to get in the weeds just a little on one question. Do you have your book?
I do.
You okay? The charts on page 32 just confused me a little. They look like they're the same information, but different numbers, and I don't know what the difference between those two.
I'm
On
sorry.
page, the funds, do you see that?
On page 32?
Yeah. There's funds, expenditures, and it's the same years and all the same headlines, but
Right. So at the top portion, you can see the revenues that came into each of those fund categories.
Okay.
So you can see like, say the top line general fund, 240 million, 273, 230.
Oh, I'm sorry.
276.
Okay.
So that's all the revenues that we received by those fund categories.
Okay.
And then the bottom portion are the expenses.
Thank
You
you.
can see the difference on that last line there.
I didn't draw that distinction. Thank you. And
Sure.
remind me, what's the Humane Society Trust?
That is, I think it's something of an orphan fund. We have about $200 in that fund. I think we were granted funding at one point in time for Humane Society services. I think we've drawn upon all those resources. It's just remaining interest that accrues, and I think we might look at ways to retire that fund. Yep.
Eric, you didn't talk about the contingency funds, but I wanted to let the council know that you and I have had a discussion about the council contingency, and not a disagreement about paying for the staffing study, but a suggestion about how to book that so that it's clear, A, that the council is paying for it, and also clear, B, that the council contingency is actually not being reduced. And so Eric and I had a discussion about booking this as city council strategic planning for the full 500,000, booking part of it as base and part of it as one time, and recognizing that the one time will go to the staffing study. So that next year, we won't be faced with having folks ask why we're increasing the city council contingency by double. And also to, like I said, to ensure that it's clear that the city council is the one that's going to manage the staffing study, and we'll do that through an IBC. So I've asked Eric for an amendment to the motions next week that would reflect that.
Madam Mayor, I want to thank the council president for clarifying that. I think that that's how many of us were thinking about it. And so that puts it down in the numbers and on paper that the way we were thinking about it is actually how it's structured. So I appreciate that.
Thank you for that. I'll do a brief overview on our fees. For those following along, our fee changes are on pages 63 through 80 of our budget document. The document includes a listing of all of our proposed fee changes, as well as any new fees. The city is required to hold a public hearing for any fee adjustments in excess of 5%. That fee hearing is scheduled for July 20th. And each of those fees that would be subject to that fee hearing are highlighted in yellow in your budget document.
Madam Mayor, I have a question. This just occurred to me. Is it, if we want to reduce fees by 5%, do we have to have a public hearing?
That's a great question. I don't believe that we do.
Okay, thank you.
The majority of the adjustments that are included in our budget document for fees are to keep up with cost increases. You know, we collect fees for services that the city provides, and as those services cost more each year, we look to do modest increases to keep up with those costs. A brief overview, and then we have staff available if there are any particular questions on fees. Within the general fund, you see several pages of parks adjustments. Most of those fees are in the 2 to 4% range due to higher costs. I'll note that within Parks and Recreation, we do have a scholarship fund available so that cost is not a barrier for participation in parks programs for our youth. We will monitor that fund. And to the degree that we need to make any adjustments, we will certainly bring that forward for city council consideration. There are higher level of increases associated with Idaho Ice World built into this document as part of an effort to make that facility more self-sustaining. There are some adjustments for planning and development services, particularly on the planning side, of approximately 5%. It's been a number of years since those planning fees have been adjusted. And then within our finance department, there are adjustments to parking, and really that's parking meter, or excuse me, parking fines, licenses, and animal fees. In terms of our other funds, Water Renewal Fund, I believe you heard an update from Public Works last week around that. We have built in an up to 53% rate increase in January for our water renewal funds if the bond does not pass. If it does pass, the fees would be much lower at approximately 9.9%. Increases in our solid waste fund of about 4.5%. And I'll note that impact fees, which don't historically go through this process, but are a fee that we do bring forward recommendations on. We are not recommending adjustments to impact fees effective October. We are in the midst of a wholesale study of our impact fee program. As part of that, we will be bringing forward recommendations on new projects and certainly having dialogue with the council around that, as well as around what the fee levels are with an anticipated implementation date of early 2022. So rather than have a quick change only to be updated again 1 or 2 months later, we're going to wait and do the wholesale change in January. That was the extent of my comments on fees. We do have staff available here for any questions that you may have. I'll just go through some anticipated next steps. As Council President Clegg mentioned, we'll be bringing the motions next week for City Council consideration, and they will reflect that change related to the contingency of City Council contingency. The public hearing scheduled at the July 20th City Council meeting both on fees as well as the budget itself. At that meeting, we'll also have the first reading on the budget, second reading on August 17th, and final adoption on August 24th. Right after that, we'll be back in front of the council to review the L2 form on August 31st, and then turn around right after that and certify our property tax budget with the county.
Madam Mayor. Eric, I recently saw a presentation at the Association of Idaho Cities in which Alan Dornfest showed a slide that showed some changes on the L2, and I just wanted to be sure that you all were apprised that they were going to make some changes on that.
Thank you for that. Yes, I have seen some of that. Some of those changes are due to the most recent legislation. So it will be particularly important that we get that done early and give the council an opportunity to review.
Thank you. And for the rest of the council members, I'll see if I can get the explanation that we were given at AIC so that on August 31st, we can be prepared to review the L2.
Thank you very much. I'm going to now relinquish the mic to Sean Wilson, and he's going to talk about our construction market.
Mayor, council members, good morning. Thanks for getting me on the agenda today. I want to give a little bit on what we're seeing in the construction market lately. And so the agenda, kind of just why am I here? Current state, what we're seeing, and then some risk management approaches. We met internally with kind of some of the leaders who spend a lot. So Water Renewal Fund, Airport Fund, Parks, and came up with some approaches to kind of manage the risks that we're seeing. So the goals of this presentation, just kind of a general awareness of the challenges. I think if you kind of read the news at all lately, you've been seeing, hey, there's been major increases in everything. And then we have a proposed risk management approach. So any input we can get on that would be great. So kind of macroeconomic trends. This is the month percent change in the consumer price index. And it's been pretty steady for about a year. And this spring, we're seeing kind of a major spike. AGC, the Associated General Contractors, publishes this. And the horizontal line in the middle is like the average bid price. And then every time prices start escalating in the shaded areas, they use this as a tool to communicate to the contractors that are members that, hey, we're seeing price pressures. You should probably start raising bid prices. Regionally, this is a Seattle construction cost index from Mortenson Construction. Unfortunately, Boise's a pretty small market, so we don't have indices here, but what they're showing, what they've been seeing is a 5% increase just in the first quarter alone of 2021. And so locally, I got an input from many of our construction partners. I interviewed probably 5 or 6 of our major contractors in town just to kind of get a pulse on what they're seeing. And the 2 big things they're seeing that's occurring simultaneously is we have really robust growth, and we're seeing escalation from that. And then also major supply chain problems, which is kind of adding to the escalation and adding to schedule impacts, which also leads to additional costs. So some general examples I pulled on, like material cost over 5-year trends. This is oil. So it took a dip last year, but it's coming back to where it kind of stabilized. This is steel and rebar, which goes into pretty much everything. And so it did shoot up this spring, but it's starting to come back down. And this is lumber. This is the one that kind of has been making the news quite a bit. You know, it shot way up and it's like shooting back down. And so supply chain stabilization, the federal government central bank thinks that it's transitory inflation. So the lumber example is showing, hey, yeah, it did spike, but it is coming back down. Where's it going to come back down to is kind of the question that we're looking at with a lot of these materials. So in the near term, kind of the plan we came up with is flexibility with schedule. So give contractors a lot of time. Don't put a lot of deadlines on them so they have a lot of flexibility. If it's possible, defer heavily inflated material purchases, like things like the lumber example. You know, if we have a project that's lumber, hey, let's defer it to another time. Pre-procure long lead items. Lead time has increased dramatically. An example from Parks was a restroom that, you know, they used to be able to order in 6 weeks. It's taking like 8 months to order right now. So if there's a way to pre-procure, bundle projects to gain scale. So we're looking at, hey, can we package up a bunch of them to make it a larger project? The airport talked about perhaps putting the 2 garages together to have a big capital project. Flexible design. Sometimes we may not get what we want. You know, I have to switch from steel to wood or ways to make sure we can still get it built. Share the risk to avoid risk pricing. So a lot of the contractors, if there's such instability, they have to price that as a risk. So they'll put a premium of like, say, 20% on the bid price. And if there's ways we could share that with them, like indexing stuff, if it increases, we pay half, they pay half, just ways so they don't build risk price in there. Avoid design bid build right now. Contractor said that's a terrible way to do it. Just because quotes aren't holding, all the trades are only like, hey, that's good for 3 days. And then they got to put a bid in. It takes a while to get the contract signed. Lastly, be patient. I put that in there just because it's pretty tough to deliver right now. And so I think if everybody's a little more patient, you know, we're working, I think, doing the best we can as the capital spending leaders in the city.
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
Sean, I'm wondering what's the alternative to design bid build? I mean, what's the kind of preferred approach?
Yeah, Mayor, council members, construction manager, general contractor is what we've been using, where we hire on qualifications. Then we kind of partner with them. They go and bid it out, and then they turn into the general contractor after they bid it out, and we go into contract with them. So
Great, thank you.
yep. Long term, another thing we talked about is reviewing our inventory for critical materials. This kind of opened our eyes to, you know, things that normally would be on the shelf, we can get in 2 days. Perhaps now it's like 6 months. And so we really need to, and this applies to airport fund, water renewal, general fund, kind of look at what's our critical stuff that we used to be able to get quickly and start making sure we have more things on the shelf or more redundancy. Second thing we talked about is starting to perform a business case on outsource versus insource models on some of our stuff. And so an example is our utility maintenance crews in public works. They're important staff frontline, making sure the toilets flush, you know, there's backups. And typically we have sort of a baseline number of crews, I think it's 3. And then we outsource, you know, to fill like kind of the valleys or the peaks that are happening. And what we're finding now is we can't get those quick contractors to respond fast. And so maybe we relook at that business case to see, hey, do we add another crew? Do we have the baseline work there to add another crew so we're not as reliant on contractors? And then the last thing, kind of monitor for embedded inflation. So the federal government says, hey, they don't think it's going to embed generally, but there's still that potential, maybe it embeds a little more in construction and doesn't somewhere else. And so just monitoring that as close as we can.
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
Sean, on the inventory for critical materials, I've heard of a chlorine shortage, for instance. Are there other chemicals that are showing up as shortages?
I'm not 100% sure on that. I probably talked to our water renewal facility operators to see if they've noticed anything. I think the chemicals was more of a Texas thing from the freeze, not necessarily a supply chain problem, but I could check on that.
Okay, thank you. And I just mentioned that the environmental policy analyst at AIC is watching these as well, and we might keep in touch with her.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Thanks.
In terms of CIP impacts, and Councilmember Sanchez brought this up, how are we looking at this? Normally, and there's two pieces to it. One is just the robust construction market and also the potential for supply chain escalation. For the construction, just having a robust market right now. Typically, when we put together our plans for, say, a fire station or other, we estimate 3 to 5% escalation. And so we're talking 3 to 4 years out, 3 to 5%. And we're definitely seeing it outpacing our typical estimates substantially. We do think there'll be some baseline budget increases or scope reductions likely. You got to be the same budget, either get smaller or you increase the budget to get the same product. And then ongoing prioritization of projects. Eric spoke to that earlier, just doing a better job making sure we're getting the right projects. And then on the cost escalation from the supply chain side, there we just monitor closely and see if anything sticks and prices start going up. And then, think in terms of contingency to reduce potential impacts. And so I put together just a quick example to show how escalation could hit projects. This is a hypothetical $15 million project that was estimated in $20 to be built in 2023. If we use our typical 3%, we would have put in a budget request for $16.4 million, which would be like the midpoint of construction in 2023. But if you, for example, saw two major 15% inflation for 2 years, then it dropped back to the mean at 3%. Your new estimate for the project would be $20.4 million. So a couple early sort of high inflation years lead to pretty substantial increases later. In this case, 25% increase. And then in terms of prioritization, we have on the left side, say we have a go, no go of project ABC is a go and DEF is a no go. Start thinking more in terms of perhaps having a yellow zone for some projects. And so if projects A and B come in, okay. And then maybe project C gets the green light. And DEF, of course, are still no-go projects, but just working with, of course, Eric and Travis and Wendy on looking at the prioritization a little closer. So next steps, continue to implement near-term strategies as our plan, monitor general escalation, supply chain. Boise is a little tough because there's not good numbers here and nobody tracks that. And so it's really just kind of reaching out to contractors, seeing what they're seeing, getting as close as we can on escalation. And then reviewing projects for baseline updates. Eric mentioned that earlier. But as we learn more, we have to revisit the projects we do have built into the CIP and further evaluate project prioritization. So with that, I will take any questions.
Madam
Mayor, no.
Just another suggestion or idea to put in the hopper. If part of the challenge is we think we're going to get hit with some kind of risk, some kind of cost risk, and we don't know if it's going to be lumber or chlorine or a cost imposed by not having access to labor that causes a delay. So, we think we're going to get hit by something in a long list, but we don't know which one and which project. One thing we could think about doing maybe next year is creating a contingency or a fund or earmarking in some way to signal that, yes, we know that we're going to have to honor a commitment and it's going to cost more than we thought. We don't know where it's coming from. Similar to the project planning portfolio, there's a pool of money that's there to be accessed by these projects to meet these unanticipated risks if they happen without having to try to build in and predict every risk for every project. Because, the reality is, we honor our commitments. We do pay for things that we say we'll pay for, and it sets up the wrong expectation if we do our best to predict what something is going to cost, and then we're subject to forces far beyond our control. We meet our commitment, and it looks like things are coming in over budget, when in fact we knew that something was going to come in over budget because we're subject to some kind of risk. So it's like I'm trying to think of ways to pool that risk at a set aside level so that the public sees ahead of time that, like I said, we know we're going to be hit with something. We don't know what it is, but here's our plan for dealing with it. Does that make sense?
Mayor, council members, that totally makes sense. It'd be more of a, we call it like portfolio contingency. So it'd cover multiple projects to dip out of it. We we've chatted about it in the past, but we'll probably have to look into that.
Madam Mayor. When you talk about expanding utility maintenance crews, I think you use Public Works as a potential example to kind of meet the needs of the peaks and valleys. Do we contract those services out to our neighboring cities as well? So like if they're not doing anything, do they in Boise, do they have jobs that we're outsourcing to other places, or how does that work?
Mayor, Councilmember, I'm not aware, actually. I don't know. Eric, would you have any idea? No. No. I figured the whole valley's probably growing fast enough. Everybody's having similar challenges.
Yeah, once you get them, they stay busy.
All right, thank you.
Good morning, Madam Mayor and council members. Nice to see you all this morning. Just to set the stage, my name is Kathy Grismeyer. I'm the Government Affairs Director for the City of Boise. And I'm here to give you a little bit of an update on what we know regarding the American Rescue Plan and implementation for this summer. So just as a reminder, the City of Boise received $36.9 million as a part of a direct allocation under the American Rescue Plan. We're a CDBG entitlement fund city, and so we were able to receive our funds directly from the federal government as opposed to working with the state this time to receive our money. We did receive our first bucket of funding. So as a reminder, we get 50% this year and then another 50% in 2022. So we received our first allocation on June 1st for roughly 18 million. And then we'll receive our second payment next year. And we need to obligate these funds by December 31st of 2024 and then ensure that we have that money spent by 2026. And we're also working off of a US Department of Treasury guideline. Right now it's an interim final rule. And so we're still anticipating that we'll receive a final document come sometime next month to kind of outline what are the specific parameters in which we're able to spend this money. And then again, as a general kind of setting the stage, we're able to use these funds for three primary buckets. So one, being able to offset costs to respond to the ongoing COVID health pandemic, being able to make investments in water, sewer, broadband, and then also looking at reductions in revenue loss for government services since the pandemic began. What's shifting though, and what we're quickly realizing is that there are a lot of moving parts as this continues to move forward. So at this point right now, based on the interim final rule that we've received, that rule was released beginning of June, right when we received our first bucket of funding. And so we had legal and DFA do kind of a deep dive into those guidelines regarding how we'll be able to utilize this funding. And what we're realizing right now is that the way that the revenue loss formula is constructed, it's not actually helpful to us. We thought we had estimated a large chunk of money that we might be able to use to offset revenue loss costs in the aggregate from last year. And that's not actually going to end up working out for us right now. The way that the interim rule is structured, it doesn't allow for a department by department line loss. Instead, it's sort of big picture what we've lost in our last fiscal year. And so under that current formula structure, the amount of money we thought we had under revenue loss is actually diminished. Then we were also looking at ways that we might be able to reimburse the city for costs related to premium pay rules from last year, but that formula also does not seem to be workable for us. And at this point, any sort of investments we look to be making in the water, sewer, broadband space regarding infrastructure investments, that all must be tied to a qualified census tract. And we don't have census data yet for 2020. And so that information likely also won't come until later this summer, maybe early September. And then the other piece that's shifting right now is as the American Jobs Plan continues to be negotiated between the White House and the Biden administration, as well as Senate Republicans, there's some talks from Senate Republicans about basically clawing back the second allocation that local governments have received in order to finance some of the infrastructure projects in the American Jobs Plan. And so at this point, we've sent a letter to Senators Crapo and Risch asking that they do not join in that chorus of Senate Republicans who are looking to do that. But there is some slight kind of murmurs and rumors moving around that might be a possibility for next year. What we're thinking then in terms of next steps is we kind of need to let the dust settle, so to speak. So we're waiting to see what the final Treasury guidance, what that final rule will look like sometime in mid-July, and then be able again to have legal and DFA review for compliance requirement. We've been also working very closely with our federal contract lobbyists and with folks out of DFA to submit questions to the Treasury Department, asking that they please reconsider how the revenue loss formula is structured. And I think that seems to be kind of a consensus bit of pushback that a lot of other cities are looking at, since it doesn't really, that was one of the big highlights of the American Rescue Plan for local government relief, and actually hasn't turned out to be as hopeful as we were anticipating. And then I think too, at this point, there's also an opportunity for us to partner with some of our local governments in the region, looking at how we might be able to maximize our ARPA investments in the infrastructure space or in kind of combined joint programmatic response to ongoing COVID needs, and then looking to match those up with other federal dollars that are available, as well as what the state might be looking at and funding within their own programs. And I know that there's a conversation anticipated to happen next week at the Treasure Valley Partnership to start having some of those regional conversations. And then also we need to have the 2020 census data so that we can also be sure that we're tying that connection to whatever investments we're making within the community, that they also are aligning with the census data information that we're being asked to follow. And so with that being said, kind of thinking through how do we continue to move forward, some ideas that the COVID funding work group are working through at this point are, we're exploring the option of bringing on an ARPA consultant. This is something that many other cities, I just got some information this morning, Albany, Birmingham, Dayton, Ohio, Green Bay, Providence, Rhode Island are looking at also bringing on some ARPA consultants. We have such a longer period of time to use these funds, and also a lot more money this second go around. And so wanting to be able to be strategic in how we're making these investments. So looking at somebody who might be able to come in, help do a community analysis or a gap or needs analysis, so that we're better understanding what needs do remain out there within what sectors or what community groups, and then also matching those with the requirements that are being provided within the Treasury guidance rule. But then looking at what sort of immediate community needs are out there. We know that childcare sector has been really devastated by this pandemic, arts sector, hospitality. And so how can we get some money out the door to fund those groups immediately, but then also spending some time to look at some long-term investments. We know that we're able to use our local government share to do some affordable housing construction. And so that remains a top city need, but then also looking at what are our infrastructure investments, internal city needs, so that we can continue to respond to COVID, and then whatever additional needs, if we do move forward with an ARPA consultant, whatever they might identify, that we can continue to make some investments in that space too. That was my update. I'm happy to answer any questions if folks have some.
Madam Mayor, thank you so much, Kathy. I know how hard you've been working, following all of this on the federal level, while also following all of our state stuff and really keeping up on all of that. My question is in relation to the broadband study that IT is currently doing. So studying broadband around the city. Will that, because when you were talking about hiring an ARPA consultant to identify community needs, I know that we're also at the same time doing a lot of studies around the city that could likely kind of come in under that umbrella. Is that one of the things being explored? Like, what are these studies we're currently doing related to mobility, related to ADA access and broadband and, you know, just general accessibility, and how will those kind of come in to this funding that we're going to receive?
Madam Mayor and Councilmember Whittings, I think that's an excellent point. And I know that when we had started to connect with departments to start brainstorming, where do we have opportunities for investments in that infrastructure space, one of the ideas that was shared was around expanding municipal broadband access at city parks. The only tie there, though, was with this Treasury guidance, which comes back to having these investments be tied to underserved or historically underserved community groups. And so needing that census data so that we understand the census tracks, so that we can then tie those investments in that space. So I think, yes, the broadband study is a perfect example of where we're already identifying needs, but we're going to have to go back and do sort of the regulatory check-in to make sure that we're complying with what the federal guidance is asking us to do, but I think that will be the same for many of the other programs. What's nice about this second round of funding is that it's far more flexible in terms of investments for underserved communities. And so there's a lot of opportunity to help lift those rising tides for folks in making investments in housing, education, childcare, broadband access, whatever it might be. But the census data tract is sort of the hook that we need to tie everything into.
That's great. And when did you say the data track info will be available to us?
Hopefully late this summer, early fall. I know we're needing it for multiple different reasons at this point, but that's kind of the initial update we have in terms of timing.
Great. I would be really interested in potentially having a work session once that data is in, so that we can also as a council understand where the underserved parts of our community are, just for, policy making, budget setting, and that kind of thing.
Great.
Madam Mayor. Thank you. Thank you, Kathy. One thing I think that we became aware of last year was just how broad that group is of underserved. I think there's folks who I think on the face would not appear to be people who are in need, but I think our federal government's response to that, to expand who received unemployment last year, was key to us being in recovery now and being able to move forward. So I'm wondering if we can also stay in that line of thinking. I think about folks who fall into the gaps. You have folks perhaps at the extreme end of being low income who will always qualify for some sort of program. But as you move further up the ladder of opportunity, you run into those gaps. People who, I guess we would call them the middle. But what we learned, I think, last year was, if you had folks who were on that edge of not being quite in need enough to qualify for a program, but still needing assistance because, just one thing goes wrong. You can't leave your kids at home unattended. You have to help them with their schooling, and you still have to do your job. Even if you have the privilege of working from home, we still had folks struggling in a variety of areas. And so I'm hoping that in this work and using these resources that we can also keep those folks in consideration. I think of organizations like Jesse Tree, that's the whole point, is to keep people from falling off the edge, to keep them stable so that they can continue to thrive. So I'm hoping we can have that perspective in our work as well. And thank you so much for your efforts.
My pleasure. Thanks.
Madam Mayor.
Yeah.
Kathy, can you go back a couple slides? I think you've got one where you're talking about, we've got a committee that we were having examine so many of these funds, or that we will in the future. I'm curious as to what is the consistency of that committee? Is it all city staff? Is it partners in the community? Who are the folks that are looking at how we might use those funds?
Madam Mayor and Councilmember Halliburton, right now the COVID funding work group is entirely comprised of city staff. So it is a mixture of staff from the mayor's office. So myself and Shirley O'Neill, who's the director of community partnerships. And then we have folks from DFA and folks from legal as well to kind of blend together community outreach and conversations that we might be having, myself or Shirley, with different impacted community groups or sectors or industries within the community, mixed with how are we making sure that we're able to comply with Treasury guidance, but also be within sort of the legal parameters of that space. I do think in maybe what your question might be hinting at in terms of how are we engaging with community or having those conversations, why the funding work group is really leaning into the idea or exploring the idea of an ARPA consultant, and that they could really help provide some additional context and community conversation and better understanding to what Council President Pro Tem Sanchez was saying around where are folks falling through the gaps and how do we identify who they are so that we can have a more kind of holistic, comprehensive slate of recommendations in terms of how we can wisely invest the $36 million that we do have.
Madam Mayor, quick follow-up. Kathy, thank you for kind of reading my mind a little bit. As we get some of that that census information back, and we are able to identify some of those groups that fit into, the areas that we want to make sure we're serving or that we're potentially left out. I'd love to see what we could do to activate, leaders in some of those areas to, help guide in those decisions. It sounds like you're already working on that. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Madam Mayor.
Yeah.
Thanks. Kathy, quick question on, you mentioned that there's conversation at least around the American Jobs Act to maybe pull some of this money back. I believe NLC sent out an alert sometime recently asking for cities who would support, asking their congressional delegation not to do that. I wondered if we'd received that. I think it's something that might be worthwhile doing.
Well, and Madam Vice President, Madam President, I believe that is tied to the letter that we sent the delegation asking
Okay.
them not to be part of
Not to
the
do that.
clawback.
Okay.
Mhm.
All right. I just want to make sure that we had participated in that.
Correct, Madam Mayor and Council President Clegg, I sent a letter last week.
Okay. All right.
And I just want to say too, on this topic, when we think about the money coming, the consultant that we'd like to have, the committee that we intend to have, it's our intent to be as strategic as possible with this funding. So there will be community need that needs to be met quickly, but then there is funding that because we have a window of time, a longer window of time to use, we can be more strategic in making the investment. And it's our intent to leverage our city funding as much as possible. So seek partnership with philanthropy, partnership with other agencies also receiving funding, and businesses and others in the community, so that it's not just $35 million that we're allocating, but instead being able to grow that so that we can meet long-term infrastructure investment needs as well as short-term needs. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Well, and with that, we're going to take a 10-minute break and
Madam
then,
Mayor,
oh, sure.
real quick before that, I didn't know where was the appropriate time for this. And it won't be today, but I think it would be helpful for the city council at some point to get an update on where all the impact fees are, how much is in each of the accounts, how much, is allocated for each district, just so we understand what's out there in terms of the future.
Okay.
Thanks.
That sounds great. Thank you. We'll be back around 10:30. go ahead and get started, everybody. Welcome back. Now we're going to move into the strategic initiatives reviews. And first up, we have Maureen Brewer. Welcome.
Thanks, Mayor, Council. Thanks for having me today. Maureen Brewer, Senior Manager of Housing and Community Development. And can you all see, are you just seeing me? Do I need to do something here? Oh, there we go. Perfect. Okay, so I have just a little bit of a strategic plan update for you this morning, and then I will be back with our larger housing and homelessness team at the end of the summer to sort of tie together all these loose strings into hopefully one uniform comprehensive package about where we are headed in terms of housing affordability and also homelessness within the city of Boise. But wanted to give you a brief update on the specifics behind some of the strategic plan tasks that we've been working on through winter into spring, and now that we're coming in on summer here. So the market gaps analysis you all saw in the May timeframe, that was that Spectrum Housing Bridge, excuse me, that sort of demarcated what it is that the market is producing in terms of housing and exactly what it is that is not, at least in terms of where we were in February and March. And I think what a lot of our community residents are feeling too, as far as what they're able to afford. So on the tail of that market gaps analysis, we have also are finishing up a housing needs analysis. So where the market gap showed us what the market may or may not be producing, that housing needs analysis is connected to that, in that now we can move into a space looking at the number of units needed. So really, what is the housing affordability deficit facing the city? And we looked at Ada County too. And then as part of this effort, again, all of this sort of these building blocks to get us to a point where we can start making strategic decisions and investments. We are also working with the innovation team within the city to create assessment plans and some visuals around dashboarding to track against our goals. So that design, if you will, is underway now, and hope to share that with you late summer, early fall. And then that will also include this report out to mayor, council, other departments in the city, and then the community at large through a specific outreach plan. So in terms of aligning city resources to match the urgency and scale of the housing affordability issue that we're facing, you all approved some additional staff capacity a couple of months ago. We had a big week last week where we made a handful of offers to bring additional staff on. Like I mentioned, we'll bring them and introduce them in August. And then we're continuing to test the tools that we have in place, and then also look into piloting new tools. So that's an ongoing effort, and we'll have, again, that status update, some kind of concrete feedback, recommendations for next steps when we're before you in August. One of the major goals of our strategic plan, and it might sound a little bit small, if you will, but is to prepare a packet and materials in plain language so that we're all singing from the same songbook, so that when you all are having conversations, you know what the talking points are, you understand the needs, understand the recommendations. But then likewise, we want to make sure that developers and other community stakeholders also understand what it is the city is trying to get done, the time frame in which we are trying to do it, and the action steps that we're taking to work towards our goal. So that's part and parcel of that, preparing a packet in plain language for us to share and share widely, and make sure that we're leveraging resources to the best of our ability. Then we have also are adding a housing advisor to the mayor's staff, charged primarily with building relationships out in the community. So she will be taking that packet out and having those conversations about, hey, this is the investment that the city can or is going to make. This is where we need community partnerships to step up and help us reach our community-wide goals. You've heard me talk about, I think the last couple times I've been before you, about our supportive housing action plan. The Corporation for Supportive Housing is working on that. It should also be concluding this summer. They have had one steering committee meeting. We have another one in the next week or two scheduled. And then we're also preparing to launch our campaign to end family homelessness on July 1. I know there's some questions about exactly what that means, what the city's investment might be, kind of who is steering that campaign, if you will. The Our Path Home Executive Committee is really charged with steering the campaign. What's happening on July 1 is that we're launching a housing crisis hotline, and we have 2 new triage staff. So essentially, and I won't get too far into the weeds with this, but essentially in 2017, we launched coordinated entry, and that was that single kind of funnel entry point for households experiencing literal homelessness. So if you're already on the street or already in emergency shelter, this housing crisis hotline will serve anybody in a housing crisis, regardless of what your situation is. You might be in a hotel motel, you might be doubled up with friends or family, you might have an eviction notice or be behind on rent. So we'll be able to better divert people from the system and refer them to the appropriate resource. So that launches July 1. And then this is one of the biggest sort of to-dos in terms of the next several weeks. Now that we have the housing needs analysis and we're kind of putting the final touches on that, and I'll get you a written update with sort of where that landed, we need to set a target number of units that the city will either create directly or will be a partner in creating. And that would have to do on that housing affordability side and on the homelessness side as well. And then part of that will be to create this project pipeline. So to know where we're going and make sure that we're tying in each of the fund sources in the best way possible. Okay, so I won't spend a lot of time on this slide because I know that Eric reviewed most of this with you earlier, but basically what we're looking at is an investment of over 20 million in housing affordability for this forecast through FY26. Tucked in with that is the investment in incentives, supportive housing, and then also the campaign to end family homelessness. The key here, sort of a key factor, if you will, in terms of what the annual spend will be for this 20 million plus really depends on our request for proposals timeline and when we release those and what that looks like. So I'm hoping that once we have a project pipeline in place, we can sort of pencil out timing, we can pencil out parcels, and we can start to also pencil out what the funding structure of those projects might look like. I did just want to note too that this does not include the land value of any land holdings that the city might leverage towards this effort. And then finally, and the mayor spoke to this just before the break, this other leverage sources is going to be mission critical to how much the city can get done in this space. So certainly one can do quote unquote a lot with over $20 million. The city can do even more if we leverage key partnerships and key fund sources. So I listed there home, CDBG, ARP that Kathy just spoke with you about. And then this home ARP is specific for homelessness. They use the home allocation formula to decide how much we would get. But because the city is a participating jurisdiction in the home program, that's another direct source of funding that will come straight to the city. However, there are also fund sources from other partner agencies, including IHFA, the county, and others that would behoove us to work closely with them to understand sort of what their strategic plan is in terms of spending those dollars, where they're allocating them, and making sure that we have a specific ask and set specific expectations for what we can get done if we go together. I am happy to answer questions now, or we can do that at the end after we've gone through all of the strategic initiatives, whatever works best.
Madam Mayor.
Go ahead.
I actually I do have a question based on your last slide there, Maureen. So in other leverage sources, I think this is specifically talking about funding sources. Are we also looking at, I know that we look to partners like the probably Idaho Housing and Finance Association and some of those really obvious partners in this work. Are we also looking at our other potential partners like CCDC, other organizations that have land holding and do RFPs much in the same way that we're doing that?
Mayor McLean, Councilmember Woodings, absolutely. And that's a great question. And it's also one reason why it might feel like we're slow walking this strategy a little bit, because we're in this unprecedented time. And there's some obvious partnerships. There's some partnerships that need and can grow. And then packaged with these new fund sources, we really are at kind of sitting within this window of opportunity that we want to make sure we maximize, and it includes development of those partnerships as well.
Wonderful, thank you. And I have one more question, if that's okay. Not several years ago, I guess a couple of years ago now, they're all running together. We allocated 5 million as a council toward, I think that it was around the same time that the campaign to end family homelessness came in front of us as a concept. There was a lot of talk about what we could do. Do we know where we are on that initial 5 million that we allocated? Have we done that, or? Eric, question. Thank you. Thanks, Eric.
Council member, I think that 5 million was the first allocation that we made from the general fund towards this purpose. And we have made subsequent investments out of the general fund. The current year's capital budget included a $3 million investment. The original 5 million plus the 3 million that was allocated as part of this year have been effectively pooled together.
Okay.
I think there's about $6.5 million, $6.6 million remaining from those two initial investments that have been made that are part of this 20 million that Maureen has talked about.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That answers all my questions.
Just to clarify on that too, the $2 million campaign to end family homelessness is the $2 million that we agreed to as council members back in the day.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Maureen. So the housing affordability part definitely seems it's geared towards our renters mostly, right? Are we doing anything for folks who are homeowners? Do we have anything in place for them?
Mayor, Council Pro Tem Sanchez, we are doing a handful of things on a smaller scale for our homeowners. And I would point you back, I know it's not in front of you today, but I'll have it to share again in August, to that spectrum of housing affordability and exactly what it is that the market is or is not producing. And then I think when you're able to see the deep, deep need that exists at those lower income levels, so 80% AMI and below, you'll see kind of why we're poised to make a recommendation to concentrate on rentals versus homeownership. That isn't to say that we shouldn't also position ourselves to pivot should we need to as the market shifts. So there are a handful of tools, and again, we can go over those in detail in August, that are pointed specifically at homeownership. And it'll just have to be a little bit of a balance policy-wise and investment-wise about where we concentrate now in the short, medium, and long term.
Just a quick follow-up, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Maureen. The reason I ask is, and you've heard me tell this story before, is just having that experience myself as somebody who never thought that they would be able to own a home. But nearly 20 years ago, that opportunity presented itself through Idaho Housing and Finance Association. And then 8 years as a homeowner, we enter the recession, and that becomes more difficult. And for the need of $5,000, I would still be in what is now valued at, I think, a $450,000 home. And so that's why I bring that up, is that we have those folks who are striving to be homeowners. Somehow they patched it together. They were able to do that, but they're truly making that investment in starting that generational wealth, in being a homeowner. And if there's a way that we can, again, in that Jesse Tree line of thinking, find a way to support them so that they can remain housed and have that asset moving forward and be thriving members of our community. So thank you for that. And I look forward to that presentation in August.
Certainly.
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
Thanks, Maureen. I'm really excited about a lot of the stuff that's in here. I serve as the council liaison to our Neighbors United collective impact group that serves our refugee community. And housing, of course, is one of the biggest issues that we've got right now, because we've got a new presidential administration that is showing signs that we'll see more refugees coming into the country, and hopefully more refugees coming into Boise as well. And I'm just curious, in some of the stuff that we've talked about so far, do we have any specific things that we're doing to address the needs of a potential incoming refugee population?
Mayor, Councilmember Halliburton, thanks for that question. We did include sort of a factor, if you will, for that specific subpopulation in the housing needs analysis. And I'll make sure to speak to that directly in August. A couple of things. One, Neighbors United is certainly a group where we talk about partnership, that we want to make sure that we're walking together at a minimum, and ensuring that if the rest of our sort of housing affordability plan aligns with what they are trying to get done, so that we're not working at cross purposes, and also ensure that they're included in the plans that we're making as a city. I can also add that we have grown in our partnership with them, particularly on the homelessness side, where in which they're now a formal member of our Path Home. And that means that we're better able to A, coordinate, but B, make sure that refugees are able to access housing when they come and then stay in housing. So it's certainly a work in progress, but they are one of a handful of specialized sort of subpopulations that have been included in that housing needs analysis.
And Madam Mayor, just quick, I guess maybe more of a comment. Thank you, Maureen, for that answer, and that's great to hear. We've had some presentations from our Path Home before to the council to really let us know the specific needs for our organizations that are serving people who are experiencing homelessness. It's been really, I think, great for us to get a great picture of what they may be experiencing, what some of those challenges are. I would love to, at some point, maybe in a work session, have a better understanding of what some of the specific needs from our refugee populations are, and whether that would be through Neighbors United or report back. Because I know that we have a council liaison, for them. We have a staff who attends a lot of the meetings, and we also, I think, budget to support, that group as well. So at some point, I would love to maybe get a report back from them or from that partnership. Thank you.
Mayor. Thanks, Maureen. I really look forward to the conversation we're going to have in August. For all of you, we're hoping that we can actually schedule a good chunk of time that morning and have a deep conversation around these issues. I'm particularly looking forward to moving forward to determining how to move forward with the $10 million for permanent supportive housing. As many of you know, I've been advocating for that, and thank the mayor's support. And we've had our first advisory committee meeting to begin discussions around it, but hope by August to have something more solid to bring on that as well.
Thank you, Maureen.
Thank you.
Good morning, Steve Hubble, Climate Action Manager. It's nice to see you all this morning. I wanted to start today to just go over an update of some of our key projects from FY21 and where we stand in terms of status there. So starting off, the Community Climate Action Roadmap, you all know the results of that effort. So we're excited to complete that, check that off the list, and begin to move rapidly into implementation. And then very much tied along with that, you'll recall as part of that, we set a specific carbon neutral goal for our municipal operations for city government. And we're developing a roadmap that essentially serves as an appendix to that to help us with some real specific questions and decision-making inside of city government, thinking about things like electric vehicle transition, about how we move our buildings and facilities to clean energy. So that's following quickly along. We anticipate that to be completed this fall. Moving down the list, another project this year was the Environmental Justice, Community Health, and Equity Baseline, which we've referred to as the Clean City Index. This project ties actually really well to some of the discussion in the American Resource Plan section earlier, but this is a census tract level analysis to help identify community needs in those three areas that you see mentioned there. So that is substantially complete. We're doing some internal vetting with that with a broader audience and hope to wrap that up this summer. Additionally, our staff continues to develop greenhouse gas emissions inventories on an annual basis. Those typically run about a year behind. We're developing 2020 currently and hope to be finished this summer. Some of the data has come in a little quicker than it has in prior years. And then our carbon neutral city operations, again, that's where we've had specific funding to focus on converting the fleet to electric vehicles and also for building electrification. I'm excited to share on the electric vehicle front that there will be 8 Nissan Leafs arriving this fall. They will go down in the basement by where many of you come up the elevators to your meetings and fill in the general use motor pool vehicles that folks like me who aren't driving all the time take out when they need to go to a meeting or go off site. Our fleet folks are really excited about that. It's a really good fit with EVs for those periodic use vehicles. And then I believe there's a handful of others coming on in various departments. The electrical infrastructure to support those is being installed currently, if you see some work happening down there. And then additionally on building electrification, you may recall earlier this spring, we completed an initial analysis of 10 buildings in the city fleet to look at what it would take to convert those to all electric or other clean energy sources for heating like geothermal. And we will now move into a design phase for 2 to 3 of those to pilot as converting to either all electric or a mix of electric and geothermal. So we're excited to get started with design this summer and then potentially move into installation as we move later into the year. And then specifically on the energy or clean energy front with our Energy Future implementation, I know Steve Burgos talked at one of the earlier budget presentations about our renewable energy procurement. That's a project we're really excited about that's in the concept phase at this point, but we're hoping tentatively that could be something that would roll out next summer. So more to come there as that continues. We have ongoing regulatory activities with the Idaho Public Utilities Commission. The energy program manager staff member that was added to the climate team earlier this year has been great support and really given us a full-time resource. And we've seen an uptick in the activities that we're being involved in with the PUC. You'll also remember back to Boise's Energy Future, Council requested to follow that we develop a thermal energy strategy that was specific to how our community addresses a clean transition for natural gas and geothermal. Now that we have the community climate roadmap, that really helps us set a high-level framework for those sources. And this thermal energy strategy will help us dig into a number of the details there. So we're also anticipating a fall completion for that. And then a new project or a new funding vehicle for this year is the energy and water efficiency for vulnerable communities, and anticipate being back in front of council with some details on our proposal, at least for the initial year of that very soon. And then the first two slides really share a number of the projects that the Climate Action Division is working on specifically, but we're supporting a number of projects organization-wide. And I think of this really as how we start to operationalize climate action across the city. You all will recall from the climate roadmap, the 23 priorities and opportunities really spread across numerous aspects of city operations. And you can see a few projects here that we are supporting: the development code update, our urban forestry and land preservation work with parks, general support for all the strategic initiatives and coordination, electric refuse trucks. We had some electric school buses out front yesterday that were really cool to see, but we're also really excited about 10 electric trash recycling and compost trucks that will come on with Republic Services, our franchise provider, this fall. Also supporting the water resources and recycled water initiatives from our water team in Public Works, and then supporting the mayor's office on the Climate Economy Accelerator. And then closing out with a quick overview of our budget requests for FY22. The first two lines there, $150,000 each for climate action and energy future into implementation. Generally, those funds cover program costs, consulting costs where we need them, energy. Occasionally, we need legal support that helps us with outside legal counsel, should that be necessary, community engagement, grant match, a number of different things that are within those components. And then following on to the first year, an additional $100,000 of funding for the energy and water efficiency for vulnerable communities. And then also want to mention a specific inclusion in the capital budget for fleet vehicle electrification. So if a department vehicle is well suited to convert to electric, these are funds that would help them cover the initial cost difference if they did not have that in their budget already to support an electric vehicle, or charging if they need charging at the facility where that vehicle would be housed. And then I think it's important to close these numbers for an issue as significant as climate might seem modest, but I think it's important to remember that spectrum of climate activities across the city. And so there are numerous programs that are supporting climate action that have their own budgets that fund those activities. And with that, I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Madam Mayor. Sure. Thank you, Steve. And you started to answer what my question was with that last point. Can you give us an example of other, so I'm assuming that there would be things that come out of the capital budget, for example, major repairs and maintenance, for example, that would also go toward our climate initiatives. Can you just give us maybe a couple of examples of what those might be?
Sure, Mayor, Council Member. I mentioned one, certainly electric vehicles is one that would fit that very well. Another example would be where we would include a major repair and maintenance for an HVAC system in a building, for example. So we would look going forward when we would look at replacing that system, we would look if there was an opportunity to go to all electric, to convert that system from most, which are currently electric for cooling, but likely natural gas for heating. We would look to go all electric in the future, anticipating obviously with Boise's energy future, the clean electricity grid of the future. And then additionally, the municipal roadmap that I touched on, I think will help us think about how we build out our capital needs in the future. For example, we have facilities that may house a number of vehicles, and we may need to start to think about significant upgrades there for charging, for example. So you could see those adds to the capital budget in the future to time with when those vehicles would be coming.
Great, thank you. And I have one more question, Madam Mayor. I think it was 1 or 2 slides back when you were talking about the green tariff with Idaho Power. And I'm assuming that that's related to new solar facilities on city-owned property. Is that correct?
Madam Mayor, Council Member Woodings, the general discussion around green tariff and renewable energy procurement would be essentially the development of a new rate classification that would allow the city or potentially other customers to directly procure renewable electricity from our utility providers. So beyond that, the discussion is still at the concept phase, awaiting the filing of such a tariff if that were to go forward with the Public Utilities Commission.
Great. I have one other question. Thank you, Steve, for clarifying that. I think it would be good to, much in the same way that we envision using city-owned lands for affordable housing, look at ways that we use city-owned land to further our climate goals and our clean energy goals. For example, if we have land, out by the airport that might not be suitable for anything but industrial type development, could we issue an RFP on that land and open that up to commercial solar developers? And somehow either as a community or as a city then purchase that energy back, or have some kind of arrangement where we're the off taker of that. So I think that there's a lot of maybe interesting ways that we can do that. And, I think the green tariff is a great idea. And also we could have some other opportunities to look at. So I would encourage Public Works to look at some of those as well.
Mayor, Council Member Woodings will definitely keep those recommendations in mind as we move forward.
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
Thank you. Excuse me. So just a reminder to council, we did use 80,000 of our contingency last year for the City of Trees Challenge, and that has been also moved into the parks budget. So on the list of monies that's being spent in a different department, that would be one of them. One of the questions I have for you, Steve, as part of that program, the Treasure Valley Canopy Network and the carbon assessment that was done on the forest in the Treasure Valley applied for and received acceptance into the city forest credits program. And although that's not yet finalized, I believe we're working right now to do just that. I just didn't see it listed anywhere. I didn't know if you were counting it anywhere in the climate action plan.
Madam Mayor, Council President Clegg, I'm trying to recall the discussion on that amongst many others recently, but I believe we could either fund that out of the general climate funding that you see here, or potentially within this year's budget with what we might have. But I'll coordinate with Parks on that and get back to you to confirm.
And it may actually not be an additional cost as part of the City of Trees Challenge. The trees that we plant may be counted as part of this city forest credit program. So we'll get some green credits back for it. So just wanted to make sure you were aware of it and coordinate with Parks on the details.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor, City Council members, Bree Brush, Transportation Policy Advisor. Thinking about our transportation work, it really is all centered on making it easier for residents to bus, bike, and walk. But it's also about deepening our relationships with transportation partners in the community. And the slide before you shows how we can advance those priorities by working with those partners like Valley Regional Transit and the Ada County Highway District. For our annual contribution to VRT, we expect that we'll still be working on strategically positioning State Street for larger federal investment, but continuing to enhance the rider amenities on our other best-in-class bus routes like Fairview and Vista. Next on here, you'll see CityGo. CityGo is the Downtown Mobility Collaborative. They aggregate transportation services for employers to make it easier for them to offer commuter programming. In addition to the campaigns they expect to run on shifting commuter thinking while employees return back to work, CityGo will also be doing a lot of data collection on commute choices, because we know those traffic congestion problems that existed before the pandemic will continue to persist, and having that confirmation will be really helpful to direct our decisions going forward. The last item on this slide is the Ada County Highway District Commuter Ride Workplace Mobility Grant Program, kind of a mouthful. It's a brand new program that Commuter Ride intends to launch just in the coming months. And this will be available to businesses that might have limited resources to apply for funding to purchase things like bike racks, bike storage, carpool passes, carpool signage for their parking lot, any equipment that could make it easier to allow their employees to smart commute. As part of this, the Commuter Ride team also intends to work one-on-one with grant recipients to launch any education needed for their employees or any outreach to encourage them to use those new resources that they could get through this grant. And then just a brief update on some of the projects already underway. The Pathways Master Plan that launched early this year is now in phase 2 of outreach. This is reporting back to the community what we heard in the survey, and the survey that closed last month, and then fine-tuning the proposed network map based on the outreach and the input that we've received. And then finally, Vision Zero, which is a holistic approach to reducing serious injury and death on our city streets, will soon be underway. We have a task force slated to launch next month, and that group will work on proposed recommendations to inform an action plan by the end of the calendar year. Very short. I'll stand for any questions.
Madam Mayor, just a quick comment. I know it's only $20,000, but I'm excited to see that partnership with ACHD. I think anytime we can form those partnerships, it's great. But that's a really interesting one because Boise as a city used to have the most bicycle-friendly businesses in the entire country. Then we were tied for Pittsburgh, and then Fort Collins blew us out of the water several years ago. But it's a really interesting initiative because it is sort of like our climate action roadmap where it does help businesses contribute to a larger effort. The city of Boise itself as an organization is a silver bicycle friendly business. And even this partnership with ACHD and contributing to those funds for other places kind of elevates the city of Boise's status. And so it'd be really interesting to see if we could figure out a way to tie some of those things together, because I do think it is a really exciting partnership, especially for businesses who may not have been able to invest in some of those things, and to really kind of put the city of Boise on that map. So thank you for the effort there. It's really appreciated.
Madam Mayor, thank you so much, Bree. It's great to see all of this information in one place. My question is related to the Transportation Action Plan, which does not come up very often, although it is a wonderful document. And I would encourage anyone interested in multimodal mobility to look through it and see what the recommendations are. Is it something that anyone talks about anymore? I mean, I know that it was developed in partnership with ACHD and others, but I never hear it mentioned. I never hear it mentioned when we're looking at roadway infrastructure or anything. Do people still talk about it?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Woodings, yes, it is used as a guidebook for all of our transportation work. Even though we might not outright say it, the steps that are mentioned in that action plan are steps we use to inform these choices here, to invest in these things and to take on things like pathways and Vision Zero. Vision Zero specifically was one of the steps mentioned in the Transportation Action Plan. I should have included that here, but we do use that as sort of the guiding light for all of the transportation work.
That is wonderful to hear, because every time I see that there's a new task force or something else happening, I'm like, oh, I hope that they're not reinventing the wheel, because it's such a great document and there's so many great ideas in there that you're right, contribute to Vision Zero, contribute to pathways. So I'm glad that that's kind of the guidance document for all of this work. That helps me out a lot.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor, that just brings up a quick comment from me. In addition to the TAP, which we developed some years ago, ACHD developed a livable streets guideline, and out of that, the master streets map. I'm actually hoping that the Vision Zero task force can help ACHD look at that document and make recommendations for how to update it. I think it's time to do that. So absolutely right that we should always be using our founding documents and updating them instead of creating new.
Madam Mayor? Thank you, Councilmember Woodings, for bringing up that document. So Bree, I think we're on the TAP thing right now. I don't know if you're a part of that, of being a part of updating that, but since we have so many folks being displaced because of the increased housing costs, and we don't have the public transportation system that we would like, I'm hoping that equity is addressed as we do that update work, to recognize that that is a big change that is happening in our community.
Madam Mayor, Council Pro Tem Sanchez, I don't know specifically about updating the transportation action plan, but that equity lens is being incorporated into a lot of other projects. For example, the State Street projects, the alignments of some of those TODs are in areas that are targeted for more affordable housing, things like that.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. I'm pleased to present an update today on some of our FY21 and FY22 priorities in economic development. I'm going to go over some of the projects that we have currently underway and then speak a little bit to a few of the projects that we have planned for the latter part of this fiscal year and FY22 as well. Starting with expanded patios and parklets. This is a project I know this council is well familiar with, currently underway, continuation of the project that was implemented last year in the wake of COVID for economic recovery, basically to support small businesses that needed additional space and footprints for their operating areas. Following a presentation in late May of this year, where this program received continued strong support and direction for continuance. We're looking to help defray some of the costs related to the implementation of traffic control around these parklets that a number of our small businesses have expressed interest in getting some additional assistance for. So another part of this is, of course, the improvement of the design, the aesthetics around these traffic control devices in particular. The idea being to improve the overall appearance and make the look a little bit less construction zone, a little bit more inviting for folks on the street, and emphasizing the placemaking potential of some of these parklet areas. So currently the Downtown Boise Association is prototyping improvements to the design. They have a sort of a design that they have put together and are ready to present at our next opportunity to our special events team. The idea being there that most of the folks in the special events team are the group of folks that really have, that are stakeholders in this process that we will need to ensure that we have approval and review from, including folks such as the Boise Police Department, Boise Fire, Clerk's Office, and a few of our external stakeholders as well. So looking forward to presenting that in the next week or so, and hopefully having direction to continue moving forward with this exciting project. Next, 8th Street. This is the continuation of our 8th Street Open Street program. Presently, we have prioritized ADA improvements and modifications, particularly at the intersections around 8th Street. We have a bid opening tomorrow that will help us move forward with the improvements that have been designed, proposed with input from our stakeholders, as well as support from our internal ADA staff and consultants for that are contracted by our ADA staff to inform what needs to happen with improving the safety and accessibility and usability for all users on 8th Street. So looking forward to seeing that bid opening, and following that, hoping to make an award and move quickly with the implementation of some of those measures around ADA modifications on 8th Street. Following that, we are hoping to and planning to put together a scope of work that will look toward the long-term vision for 8th Street, taking some of the input from our stakeholders there that have very positively reacted to the idea that 8th Street is a placemaking tool, that it's a celebration of a gem of our downtown, and looking toward what some of those long-term considerations can be. So that will include planning, engineering, and significant public outreach around this sort of long-term vision for what that 8th Street corridor can be. Next, this idea of an enhanced business attraction program. So the concept here is really just to ensure that we're doing everything we can to be as creative, agile, and intentional about our business attraction efforts. And also ensuring that whatever we do to enhance our abilities around this, that it's done in close coordination with our existing partners in this space, and just ensuring that we have a plan in place to make sure that we're doing everything we can to be as creative and intentional here around business attraction. Examples of some costs might include consultant costs for convening folks that would be part of this process, and potentially meeting a travel cost. But we are looking forward to scoping that out more thoroughly this year and looking into the next fiscal year as well. I'll just note as well that the focus areas for our business attraction program will be informed by our economic development strategic plan, which is, as many of you know, currently underway, and we are looking forward to having completed in the fall of this year. Also related to our strategic plan and outcomes that we anticipate coming from that are a marketing and branding services and collateral piece. And this will be done in concert with, of course, our ongoing business attraction, business expansion, retention efforts. We'll be looking at those focus areas that are identified in our strategic plan, and anticipate that this will include a range of branding and marketing tools, including web, print, and other methods for ensuring that we are getting our economic development priorities out there and recognized, and that we are supporting our strategic plan goals with a branding effort that really looks at making Boise an attractive and continuing to be an attractive and exciting place to do business. Two other items that we have related to FY22 priorities are an infrastructure study to prioritize improvements, particularly in what we've branded as the Airport Commerce District, the area south and east of the airport, particularly around the Gateway East urban renewal area. The area is, of course, developed faster than has been anticipated, and we are feeling the need to take a closer look at some of those infrastructure improvements that will be required near term to help support that development that has been taking place and that we anticipate will continue to take place in that area, particularly industrial development. And then finally, a scoping effort around a long-term view of what a farmer's market type facility could look like in the city of Boise. And the intent around this is to better understand how the city can be a good partner and look to support efforts around a more stable location for a farmer's market close to downtown. So those are our key priorities. Happy to stand for any questions. Thank you.
Madam Mayor?
Yes.
Sean, and maybe for you, Madam Mayor, this question, the marketing and branding services and collateral, we're increasing our capacity internally in CE quite a bit. Is that something that can be done internally, or are we going to contract for that?
Madam Mayor, Council President Clegg, we anticipate that we will have significant support internally, but have also looked at the possibility of contracting for some of that work as well. So I think a big part of this will be ensuring that we are leveraging our internal resources well, looking outside to see if there are additional resources there and perspectives that we might be able to leverage to make this branding and marketing program as dynamic and useful as it can be.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Sean. This all is wonderful, and I am excited about the thought of our parklets having a more beautiful barrier around them. But it was really lovely this weekend seeing so many people enjoy those businesses. So my question is, as we move forward with increasing the types of businesses that we attract to the area. Incorporated in this work and this outreach, are we taking into account bringing in those parties who come from diverse backgrounds, who could help transform what people think of our city? I think folks on the outside may not know that we do have diverse businesses in our community. They're not always centered in downtown. They're in other parts of the city, but I'm wondering if that'll be part of those efforts as well.
Madam Mayor, Council Pro Tem Sanchez, absolutely very excited to ensure that this is a broadly representative outreach effort that we conduct in every respect of the priorities that we have here. And I'll note that we've very much appreciated and welcomed the efforts that you have brought to our economic development strategic plan to help ensure that we do this in an intentional and broadly representative fashion. So we look forward to continuing to do that and welcome your continued involvement. Thank you.
Madam Mayor. Yes. Thank you so much, Sean. And Sean has been so patient with me and my million questions and me always trying to stick my nose in his business. So I appreciate that as well. I'm really happy to see farmers market scoping on this list. I think that, I think a lot of us have been volunteering at the farmers market and doing different things, really engaging with our local agricultural community. And it's, I think, bubbled up in a lot of ways as we talk in our city and our valley about preserving farmland, about keeping farmers where they work, and keeping them, keeping their personal economies healthy, and keeping that local agricultural economy healthy as well, as keeping our land healthy. So I really look at that and creating a more permanent year-round space for the farmers market as a way that our community can participate in farmland preservation in the valley, which I think everyone sees as really important from a variety of perspectives, from climate change to just having a more robust local food economy that has myriad benefits for public health. So I'm really happy to see that there. And if I can help out in any way with any of that, please let me know. I'm happy to.
Madam Mayor, just a quick follow-up, I think, to something that Lisa brought up and you answered really well. I think that there's businesses and there's individuals who haven't moved here because they've seen what's going on sometimes in the news that reflects poorly on our state. And I think that the mayor's efforts in making this a city for everyone is so important when it comes to recruiting new businesses and diverse businesses coming to Boise. And so I hope that when we're looking at that marketing and branding and that recruitment, that we really do focus on what the city is doing to make it a city for everyone. And so that we are attracting those businesses that reinforce those values. Because I do think that some people are sometimes scared away when they're looking for multiple locations and they see the news and some things that don't represent the type of area that they may want to live, that may not actually represent Boise itself.
Madam Mayor. Yes. Everybody has a perspective, so here's mine. The greatest challenge that people face in the city of Boise is the gap between the wages and the cost of living. And if we're investing in economic development, merely developing an economy doesn't necessarily address or tackle that problem. More than anything else, people just can't afford to live here on the wages that we pay collectively as a society. And so, my perspective is this is all wonderful. The comments are all wonderful, but it's equally important that as we're doing this work, we're making sure that the people who are coming in, the businesses we're stimulating, the efforts we're making are also, they plug in some way to a long-term strategy to bring wages up through the competitive, features of the marketplace.
All right, thank you all. I appreciate your comments. Sean, but just before we leave you, Patrick's comments are spot on. It's affordability for housing and then wages keeping up with it. And I'm just wondering if you have copies of the Economic Recovery Task Force that you could drop with council members, the updated report, because one of their top recommendations was addressing housing to begin with, but then there were other components that I think council would enjoy seeing if they haven't seen already.
Mayor, more than happy to do that. And I will
I'll make every effort to get those to the council members today.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. So we're going to break for lunch, and then TJ, your item will go at the end of the city council meeting, as if like in other times when strategic planning sessions have carried over. Okay, great. So we'll be back here at noon for the regular council meeting, and then after that council meeting, we'll cover TJ's memo. Thanks.